Hello and welcome to the World Wanderers podcast, your source for travel stories, travel destinations, and travel philosophy.
I'm Amanda.
I'm Ryan.
And we're your hosts. Hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of the World Wanderers podcast. Today's episode of the podcast is brought to you by you, the listeners of the show. For those of you who have listened to the show for a while, you've probably heard these ads a couple of different times and ways, and something that we're really excited about is having this Patreon page, which is this platform where you're able to support us with just a small amount of money, and we're able to give back to you in a bigger way than just the podcast. So by joining our community on Patreon, you get cool things like one-on-one hangouts with Ryan and I, postcards from exotic places around the world, and much more. So if you want to join, head on over to patreon.com/theworldwanderers. Thanks so much for your support. We are very excited to be joined on the podcast today by Lauren Rudick, who is Canadian, but who is joining us from Costa Rica today. And Lauren and I first connected because she is a yoga teacher. She's an international yoga teacher teaching around the world. And when I chatted with her for my yoga business podcast, we realized that we also have the love of travel in common. So we decided what a perfect way to combine our other interests of travel and having her on the World Wanderers. So we're very excited to have you here today, Lauren. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
And so we thought a good place to start would be to back up couple years where you were baby yoga teacher and you decided to set out on your first trip. Can you talk a little bit about what inspired that trip?
My first trip with yoga and traveling, like work trip?
Probably you did a big backpacking trip, didn't you? That was a year long.
Yeah. So that was sort of before I started teaching yoga. I just felt very inspired and empowered after my first yoga teacher training. I didn't actually intend to teach yoga. I just kind of wanted to see the world on my own terms. So I set out for a trip with no end and no direction. And yeah, I just started traveling. I said yes to any international job that would pay for my flight and accommodation. And it took me around the world a couple of times. And it ended up being a 2-year trip. I visited 23 countries across 5 continents. It was pretty incredible. And I guess that's when I realized that traveling is just part of who I am. It's part of my nature. I felt really comfortable on my own and very comfortable on the road. And it seemed to force me to have to be the best of myself all the time and really learn a lot about myself as well, like what makes me tick and when I feel lonely and what I need to feel happy. And I don't know, just all kinds of, and trusting others, all kinds of life lessons that sort of come up when you're on the road on your own.
Yeah. Had you wanted to travel before that?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I had taken some trips before that as well. In college, I did like a Europe trip with my boyfriend at the time and my sister. And that same boyfriend and I had done like a road trip across Canada where we drove from Vancouver to Montreal. So I had done quite a bit of traveling before, but never totally alone and never with kind of no end point and no plan.
Driving across Canada, Vancouver to Montreal, that's a big drive.
Yeah, it was a long way. It was a good time though.
It's like you hit like east of Calgary and it's just all flat.
Yeah, even driving into Calgary was such a trip because you can see it from like hours away. It's so flat when you drive into it and you're just like, okay, we're almost in Calgary. I'll be there in an hour. And then, you get progressively closer, but you're, been driving for 3 hours and like, okay, Calgary seems right there. And you just keep going. You're still not there yet.
It's like a mirage. Skyscrapers.
It's like a mirage. Yeah, a lot of the middle of Canada feels that way. It's like, oh, here's one long road. And also what was crazy about that drive is you don't realize how fast you're going, especially through the prairies, because it's completely straight. Like, you just kind of hang out, and as long as you have a finger on the wheel, you seem to be going in the right direction. And at one point we were like, whoa, we're going 160 kilometers an hour. We gotta slow down.
Yeah, especially if you're in like a nice car too. I've had that experience where like you're used to driving or I've been used to driving like kind of a shittier car, so you really feel speed. But then if you're like on the prairies in like a nicer vehicle, you're like, oh crap, I'm going like 150 right now.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I drove a total of about 2 hours that entire road trip, so I didn't notice at all because I wasn't driving.
It's the perfect time for a nap.
Yeah.
What were some of the jobs you worked over the course of that 2 years while traveling?
So the very first one was on cruise ships. I was meant to be a kids counselor on this cruise ship. It was a very luxurious, small cruise ship. But as it turned out, there was no kids on the cruise. And by law, they had to have kids counselors on the ship because they had promoted and advertised a kids program. And at night, everyone dresses up quite formally, and it was the first formal night, and I was dressed up, and the cruise director saw me and said, "Hey, you look very nice tonight." And I said, "Oh, thank you." And he was like, "Well, since, you don't have anything to do, there's a gentleman in the bar, and he just lost his wife. Would you go and sit next to him and have a chat?" And I was like, "Okay." And basically I just hung out in this lounge where they were playing live jazz, and I was wearing a nice dress and had a couple of cocktails with this older gentleman who had just lost his wife, and he spoke very highly of our conversation. And then I became a hostess on that first cruise ship. So that was kind of my job, was just schmoozing. That was my first kind of job on the road. And then after that, I was a nanny in Italy, and that was really not for me. And I knew about a month into that job was really not for me, but I didn't really know what my exit strategy would be. And you can't really just, ditch a family with young children like that. I felt very guilty about this idea of just kind of picking up and leaving. So it took me about 4 months until I realized, how I was going to get out of that situation.
Yeah. What did you end up doing?
I got another job. So essentially what I didn't say was that when I left for my first big stint, this travel thing for 2 years, I had about $200 to my name. Like, I put all the last of the pennies I had into yoga training. And so the reason why I was taking jobs that would pay for my accommodation and plane tickets because I had no money.
Right. And
then, I saved a little bit working on the cruise ships, and then spent it on a plane ticket to Italy because that one didn't pay for the plane ticket, but, paid for my accommodation and meals. And then, so basically, first of all, I had to save up money to actually be able to leave. And also I was kind of stubborn. I wasn't ready to go back to Montreal, and I certainly didn't want to go back and feel like a loser. I just ran away for, 3 months and I couldn't make it work. And now I'm back where I started and living with my parents or something like that. I just had this huge amount of, pride to uphold. And I don't mean pride in a good way of being proud of oneself. I mean it as a stubborn kind of pride. Mm-hmm. I just was too proud to come back. And so I started applying for more international jobs while I was in Italy. And it was actually on a Craigslist Montreal website that I found this application to teach English in China. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so unqualified for this, but whatever, I'm going to apply. And they asked me to do an interview. And again, because I was totally unqualified and didn't think there was a chance in the world I would get this job, I was completely relaxed. When we had the interview, I was just totally colloquial and relaxed and chill. And I guess because of that, they were impressed by my ability to be conversational and open. And they gave me the job on the spot. And I was totally shocked. And I thought, for sure, this is not legit. There's no way. I don't have any teaching experience. And it was teaching at a university in China. I was like, there's no way. I'm not qualified for this. Didn't think it was legitimate. And then lo and behold, they sent me a contract. And I was like, okay, I'll go. And at worst, I'll be in the hole for a plane ticket home from China. And at best, I'll have this experience. So I taught English in China at Guangxi University. And that was a total trip in itself. And then teaching English in China was quite a lucrative job. And so from there, I saved some money. I did a bunch of traveling in between. And then I ended up doing another yoga teacher training in Australia. And so those were kind of the big things on that trip. I started with a yoga teacher training in Mexico, and then did the work on the cruise ships in the Caribbean for about a month. And then I was living in Italy for 4 months, and then China for 1 year, and Australia for about 2 months. And then in between, I just kind of traveled around wherever I could, or on the weekends, I would take little trips to wherever I could just to explore.
Yeah. Wow. What an amazing 2-year adventure. I'd love to talk a little bit about teaching English in China, because a year in China is a long time to spend in a culture that's so different from our own in Canada.
Oh, yeah.
So what was your living situation and stuff like there?
So my living situation was really comfortable. I was being put up in a housing complex where most of the teachers lived. So we had an apartment building, and every teacher had their own apartment. So my housing was comfortable. I had a nice apartment with, my own washer dryer. It was the only time in my life I've ever had a washer dryer in my house. A Western style bathroom with a king size bed in my bedroom. It was nice.
Yeah, that sounds really nice.
Yeah, I mean, it was, a different style of furniture than I would like normally choose in the West, and, maybe like a slightly different style of housing structure. But yeah, it was like totally normal. They tried to make it comfortable for Westerners. And I'm also someone that really likes to nest. It's really important to me. If I'm somewhere for more than a week, like I'm going to make it my own. And so in China, for example, I went to like a textile market. I had pillows made for my house and like a comforter made for my bed. And it was very inexpensive to like print things. So I printed posters of like photos I'd taken on my travels and put them on the wall. So it was really like my home,
Yeah, definitely. And did you enjoy teaching English?
No. Actually, my students wrote me like a notebook as a goodbye present, which was really sweet. They threw me a goodbye party and made like this notebook, and they all signed it. And like, so some of them were like, "Dear Lauren, I really hope for you that you find your passion job and don't teach English anymore." Yeah, like they knew that I wasn't super into it. I mean, I love teaching. Obviously, I'm a yoga teacher, but I think it was the curriculum that I really didn't enjoy. I didn't love communicating the language. Like I don't know. It was just like the structure of the curriculum. And to be honest, I was not enamored with Chinese culture. I found living there really difficult for me.
Yeah.
Some people love it. My colleagues are still there.
What were some of the things that were difficult about it?
Being stared at constantly, being spoken about behind my back, but like in front of me constantly. And I understood Chinese after, a few months there. And so I could hear what people were saying about me, and I didn't really know how to respond because my language skills were limited, but the understanding was there enough to like hear that people were constantly talking about me. And it was really annoying. Staring all the time. Like everybody is allowed to stare, doesn't matter. And there's nothing you can do to fit in. There's nothing you can do to feel anonymous. And looking back now, I realized that most people were just curious. Like I was living in a city of 6 million people. My university campus had 30,000 people living on it. And there was like 100 foreigners in this city. So for most of the people that I encountered, seeing a Westerner in person was the closest they were going to get to traveling outside of China, because 90% of Chinese people will never be able to leave the country. It's very difficult for them. It's very expensive. There's a lot of red tape. So now looking back, I'm like, well, this is, a curiosity, the same kind of curiosity that I have when I travel, and I'm sure I've been guilty of staring at people who look different when I've been traveling. To have so many eyes on me all the time, I found really overbearing, I guess. So there was that aspect that was a challenge. And then, feeling like there was nothing I can do to fit in. And in terms of my community, I mean, the teachers that were living there were basically just like a gang of misfits. We were friends because we were the only foreigners there to be friends with, and the only people there who had anything in common, which was that we were all from the Western world. But I think many of us in our hometowns wouldn't choose each other as friends.
Right.
Some would, for sure. Definitely. And some of them are still in touch and still very close. But I felt kind of disconnected from my peers there as well. So that was hard, like not having community.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's kind of interesting to hear about the staring. And I mean, we just spent 8 months in Asia, so I definitely right. Understand that. But I think it's a little bit more in the Chinese culture. We have two like travel blogging acquaintances who both live in China, and they were saying like for him, he's lived there for long enough now that when people stick like a phone in his face to take photos, he's like, I do it back to them. And they're so shocked when he does it because they're like, no, like no photos of us. And he's like, you can't just take photos of me and stare at me and not like have it back.
Oh, totally. I mean, I think I must be in like so many family albums back there. Like, people would stop me on the street all the time to take photos, and I would do the same to them. Or sometimes we would take photos of people taking photos of us. I did foray into a very successful singing and modeling career, though. I'm not going to lie. So, living in China afforded me all these privileges and opportunities that like would never exist in the West. And one of them was that I got picked up by an agent, and I was doing modeling and singing, like professional singing gigs. Like I would never be a professional singer in America or Canada. Like I can hold a note, but like I'm certainly not incredibly talented as a pop star. But there, like it was part of the show that I was like white and I could sing, and I would do like essentially paid karaoke all the time. And like sometimes there was like 1,000 people at the shows I would do. Wow. And that was a blast. And there was like a backup band sometimes, and that was so cool. Like being a little celebrity. I feel like
that's so cool. Is there
good part of the staring, I guess.
Yeah. Are there like YouTube videos of that? Like, can you find those
Not on
videos?
YouTube, but there is a music video that was made.
Oh, wow.
That's so good.
Yeah, it's it's got like slow-mo running through fountains and like laying on the floor singing.
Oh, wow.
Oh, it's pretty special.
That's like a full-on like huge in Asia experience.
Yes, absolutely. One experience that I didn't get in China that I really wanted to is I had a boyfriend there. He was from Holland and he was a gem. And honestly, like my experience there would have been a lot more challenging if I hadn't met him. Like we were really a great team. And we used to joke. So in China, it's very common. Like when people get married, you would do wedding photos, and the wedding photos often cost more than the wedding. And the wedding photos are like a much bigger production than the wedding. So the wedding photos involve multiple locations, photo shoots, multiple dresses, makeup artists, hairstyling, and the couple will just pour like everything into these photos. And they're just hysterical and super cheesy. And you'll have photos in like traditional Chinese wedding garb and then traditional Western wedding garb and, dynastic wedding clothing. And we just thought it was hilarious. And so we talked about, potentially just joking around and taking like Chinese wedding photos together. And he was all for it. We were going to do it. And then I was like, you know what? It might be a really bad omen. Like, do you want to have a real wedding one day? And I think I feel not so good about the idea of like putting on a wedding dress for someone I'm not going to marry.
Right. That's fair.
But honestly, like I kind of wish I had.
Those would be good photos to look back on now.
Yeah, totally.
Was it
like hair extensions and everything? Yeah.
Was it the type of thing where it was like you had a 1-year contract, so when you started, you knew you were going to stay that long, but from very early on, you knew that was all you were going to stay for, or did you come to a decision at some point where you're like, okay, I need to move on?
I think I knew pretty early on, within about a month or so, that it would be 1 year for me, and that would be that. And I was going to try to stick out the experience as long as I could and enjoy it for what it was, explore as much of China as I could and the surrounding areas, and then move on. It just wasn't for me. Like the teaching wasn't for me. Living in China wasn't for me. Like I said, I didn't love the culture. I didn't love the curriculum I was offering. I didn't like the setting of the university. It wasn't a match for me. And the reason why it wasn't a match is that I really feel this way. Like I was meant to be an international yoga teacher. Like this is my dharma. This is my path that I'm on. And I think the reason why none of those jobs were really a good fit before that is that it just wasn't who I am. Who I am is what I'm doing now.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting to hear about the path that got you to where you are now. Because I feel like we often, I feel like, need to find our no's to find our yes. And it sounds like you really did that on your travels.
Yeah. And that was really what it was about, was figuring out like, who am I? What do I want? Where do I want to live? What do I love?
Yeah.
How do I love myself more? Like that was really, really what it was about.
Before you left on your trip and before you did your first yoga teacher training, what were you doing?
Oh, I had my heart broken. I had just been through a breakup and I was like mostly just crying, eating ice cream and being in bed.
Oh,
I had just finished university. No, it's okay. I had finished university and then the man who like at the time I was convinced was the love of my life, like broke my heart. It was just like I didn't see it coming. Now looking back, like all the signs were there, but at the time I was totally in love, didn't see it coming. He broke my heart and I didn't have a job yet. Like I had just finished university and I was just like miserable. So what I was doing was nothing, like crying and having a pity party.
Right. And so traveling, do you feel like traveling like turned that around pretty immediately, or was it sort of like a longer path to?
No, it was definitely a long haul for me. I think my travels started off as running away, and then slowly it shifted and became a moving towards. And living in China definitely was a part of that moving towards, because, I thought maybe I wanted to work with kids and I tried that. And I thought maybe I wanted to be in the hospitality industry and I tried that. And I thought maybe I'd want to be a teacher and I tried that. And it was living in China and being able for the first time really to like save enough money to have the freedom to travel elsewhere and invest in myself is what led to where I am now. Because so when I was in China, the second semester of when I was in university, I had a really easy schedule. I had like 3 full days of work a week, and then I was off Fridays and Mondays, which was like so awesome. And there was a yoga conference in Hong Kong, which is not close to where I was living, but I had the time to go because, I had a 4-day weekend. So I took the train. It was 12 hours away to this yoga conference in Hong Kong. And it was the first time I'd ever seen that there was an industry of yoga. And the reason why I went was that I just missed yoga. I missed learning yoga. I missed the community that I had discovered in Mexico and the way of life. I hadn't been to a yoga studio with English speakers in like 7 or 8 months. And it just opened my eyes to things. Like for the first time, I realized this is an industry and there are people who are making it as public speakers, as traveling yoga teachers, as authors, as musicians, as clothing designers and whatnot. And I was like, whoa, you can do so much more within the field of yoga than just teaching classes. And I just didn't know that until I went to that conference. And the only reason why I was able to go to that conference was because I had lived in China and I was close by. And then my second yoga teacher training, the reason why I was able to afford that was because I was living in China, and my second teacher training was in Australia, which was comparatively close, to Canada.
Yeah, definitely. It's really cool to hear about how, China wasn't this thing that necessarily was what you wanted to do, but it kind of enabled you to do all these other things that allowed you to do the things that you really liked, like being able to go to the yoga conference and then being able to afford your teacher training, which is pretty amazing.
Yeah, totally. And I think at the beginning I went because it was exotic and it seemed like a cool thing to do. And, on Facebook it would look awesome. And I had been to Thailand when I was 18 and I was like, oh, I can go back to Thailand. I really liked it there. It's so close. And so there was all these reasons. And I did get to travel quite a bit in Southeast Asia. I spent about a month in Malaysia and another month in Malaysia and Borneo and about a month in Thailand and some time in Vietnam. And I really, really loved visiting all those places. And yeah, so living in China was definitely an introduction to that. And I think when it comes to traveling in life, like there's this idea that traveling always has to be positive and it always has to be like the most fun time ever. But it's just like life. Like sometimes you will be lonely and sometimes it is hard and sometimes it's not so fun and sometimes it's stressful and sometimes you have to do things you don't want to do, like just like life. But ultimately, I feel it's just as important to learn what you don't want to do and what's not for you and what you don't like as it is to move towards what you do like.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that.
Yeah, I think for both of us, it's been just an opportunity to cram a whole bunch of life experience into a short amount of time and like learn a lot about yourself, about what you like and don't like, and places and other people, and just build a lot of skills as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the amount that you can learn in a short time on the road, like you said, would take like a lifetime if you're in one place.
Totally. Yeah. And I think there's also a lot of value from getting away from everything that's comfortable, like being in your home country, in your home city. It's a lot harder to challenge yourself on a day-to-day basis. Whereas if you're living in China, there's all these little things or living anywhere abroad, but we'll just use China as an example. It's all these little things are challenging on a day-to-day basis. Like, even figuring out a washing machine can be challenging if all of the letters are in Chinese characters, and crossing the road in countries like Vietnam are these small wins, ordering off menus, and you just learn to adapt.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you really learn how strong you are and like what makes you tick. And now I can, now as an adult, crafting the life that I want to live and crafting the life of my dreams, like I have such a better idea of the things that I don't need to include in my life and moving towards the things that I do want to include in my life. And ultimately, like, I've found so much happiness in my life in the last few years because I've really managed to craft the life that I want. And all of those difficult experiences, like realizing I don't like being a nanny and Europe was not the place for me. I found it very crowded and there wasn't enough nature, and, living in China and not liking the idea of standing out all the time, even though I'm someone that loves attention, realizing that I do need anonymity in my life. And, all these little bits and pieces are what allow us to craft the life that we really want to live. Because you learn about yourself. And like you said, if you're somewhere that you're comfortable and that you don't have the challenges, some of us never learn that.
Yeah, definitely. I couldn't have said that better. And so you went to Australia, you did a second teacher training, and then did you head back to Canada after that?
I did. I went to New Zealand for, I think, 2 weeks and then back to Canada because my best friend, since I was 3 years old, got married. So I went back for her wedding.
Amazing. What was it like to come back to Canada after 2 years of being abroad?
Really weird. There was a ton of reverse culture shock. And I don't think people talk about this a lot. When you move somewhere that's strange to you, you expect culture shock. And so you give yourself some allowances and some adjustments. But going back home, you think you're going to fit right in. And that wasn't the case. You know, when you leave for a long period of time and you've had all this experience, you really do feel changed. And Nelson Mandela has this quote, "There's something about returning to a place that remains unchanged and realizing how much you yourself have changed."
Yeah, that's a good quote. I feel like we've definitely experienced that even in 8 months of being away. What were some of the biggest things that you, like coming back to Canada, what were some of the biggest like reverse culture shock things that you experienced?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it was, again, like I had felt I'd grown and changed so much. And of course, everyone back home wasn't treating me any differently. They were treating me like the same old person. And I was struggling with that, for one. For two, struggling with starting like a regular full-time job and schedule and having family pressure once again. That was a big challenge. Just, you know, having my family expect me to be at places at certain times and fill a certain role that I'd always filled. That was really hard. I came back and I was like 26 and single, and most of my friends had met their partners or, you know, were on the way to getting married. And I just felt a bit left behind. At some point, like I'd had all this great experience and everybody you meet on the road is kind of in the same place as you. And then I came back and felt almost less than because I was like single and I hadn't worked, you know, a steady job in many years. And my friends had, you know, who had graduated university in those 2 years had started their careers, and they, for the first time, had, you know, like disposable incomes and were starting to think about buying homes, or they just lived a completely different lifestyle that I was capable of because I then had to, you know, play catch up. And so that was hard, feeling almost left behind.
Yeah. I think we can both relate to that. And it's interesting that you brought up the family pressure, because it's something that I feel every time I come home. It's like all of a sudden I'm home and my parents are like, come to this, come to this, come to this. And I'm like, I want to go again.
Yeah, it's like suddenly you lose that freedom to do what you want when you want. And also, I felt annoyed sometimes when I got home and people were like, tell me a story, like tell me about this and tell me about that. And I'd be like, I can't tell you the story of 2 years. And also, like, it's just life. You know, when people would say, oh, it's so nice that you took this time off to travel. And I was like, time off from what? This wasn't time off. This was time on my life. And I still don't look at it that way. I don't look at a gap year as like a break. It's like something else you're doing.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. When we graduated university, I remember a professor who I was close with was like, oh, you don't want to have this gap on your resume from traveling. And it kind of worried me. Like, I was like, no, I'm going to go. Like, I'm going to just, you know, trust my gut that this is what I need to do. And I'm so glad I did do that, because now I'm like, gap on my resume. Like, what does that even mean? Like, I'm not defined by a piece of paper that has like dates outlining when I've done certain things. Right.
And it was the same thing when I came back and started teaching yoga. Like, I'd bump into people that I went to high school with or whatever, and they'd be like, oh, it's so nice that you're doing this thing for now. Like, what do you mean for now? Like, this is just what I'm doing. Like, maybe it won't last forever, but why does there have to be this set timeline? And why does there have to be all these rules of like what you're supposed to do at this age and supposed to do at that age? And why do people from our culture see this idea of extended travel as a break from life? Like, it's not a break. It's just a different kind of life for a little while.
Yeah, we've even experienced that, I think, coming home this time. Like, I went to a bridal shower for my soon-to-be sister-in-law last weekend, and it's, you know, all my great aunts and stuff, and my grandparents are there, and they're like, you know, how was your trip? Like, are you getting settled back into real life? And I'm like, it's not like how I define, like, I was living real life in Asia. Like, that is my life. Like, right. Everything is my life.
And like 8 months isn't a vacation. Like, 8 months is not just a trip.
No, definitely not.
Of your life. Do you know what I mean? And that was a hard thing to explain to people too. Like, the 2 years I was away, it wasn't a vacation. It wasn't like I'm going on a trip. Like, it's a period of my life, and I was doing traveling. And now I'm in a different period of my life where I live between Costa Rica and Canada and on the road, and I'm growing my business. Like, this is the period of life that I'm in.
Yeah, it's always interesting, I guess, to see other people's perspectives when they haven't had that experience, because I think it comes a lot of the time from people who haven't gone away. I find that people who have traveled understand it a bit more. They're not like, oh yeah, you just like took a gap or something like that. It's like, no, you were just living over there. Like, that's just what you're experiencing.
Yeah, it's just what you're doing right now. Totally.
And so you came back and you had sort of this period of time where you're adjusting back into life in Canada. And then at what point did you decide okay, I want to combine travel and teaching yoga?
It was like the point that I realized that it was possible. Like I had no idea it was a thing. I tried for 2 or 3 years. I want to say actually probably more. Maybe like 4 years in Canada. I was teaching yoga full time and just like busting my butt trying to save money so I can travel on time off. And it was literally just one day I opened up Yoga Journal magazine. I saw a photo of a woman. I Googled her name and I saw that she was doing workshops and yoga retreats abroad. I'd never even heard of a yoga retreat. And I was just like, oh my God, yoga and traveling is a thing. This is definitely going to be my thing. And that was it. And ever since then, I just started working towards it. And that's what I do.
Yeah, that's so cool that you just saw that and were like, okay, I'm going to do this now.
Yeah, I mean, inspiration can come from anywhere, right? And, you know, when you find it, just keep walking towards it.
Yeah, do you feel like it was Catherine Budig, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like seeing her in that magazine and realizing that that was possible was kind of like a light bulb moment? Like it's like, aha, like this is what I'm going to do?
Yeah, it was completely that. Like it was literally a moment I went to her website, my eyes grew very big and I was like, whoa, this is exactly what I'm going to do. And then I just like Googled her more and saw what she was doing and how she was doing it and learned about marketing and social media. And I started reaching out to festivals and conferences and yoga studios and it just like slowly started happening.
Yeah. Were there any roadblocks along the way from doing that?
Oh, of course, like a million no's, a ton of backlash from my family saying like, maybe you should just settle down and, you know, you can't just travel forever or, you know, this is not sustainable. There were instances where like I had run retreats and teamed up with companies that, you know, then tried to really renege on our deal or really like screw me over. And so there was that kind of humps and me learning how to like, you know, put my foot down and stand my ground and stand up for myself. Yeah, I mean, I have like so many things. I've had injuries. Like just anything, you know, any kind of lifestyle or business, of course, has obstacles. And so, yes, it was not a totally smooth ride. And I think that's something important to address because when people see our kind of lifestyle on the internet, you know, we're showing the highlight reel. So if someone's following me or you on Instagram or Facebook or your blog, what you're seeing is like the best words on this possible day when you're having the best time of edited photos that you've chosen to put on the internet.
Yeah,
you know, it's
for sure.
Like, I think you said this to me before. It's like you're not seeing the like 5 days of diarrhea before that, or, you know, the 17-hour bus ride when the bus like broke a tire and you were stuck in the Andes for like 16 hours, freezing your butt off on a bus while like a bunch of guys came with blowtorches to try to fix a wheel. You know, those parts are not what we show. And so, of course, like any life, a life of travel and, you know, trying to do a business that you love also has roadblocks. Totally. And also it doesn't happen overnight. Like if people look at my life, you know, it might seem like it happened very quickly because I only came onto the international yoga scene, you know, a couple of years ago. But it wasn't like, boom, one day I was like this yoga superstar in the world. It was, you know, a very long and slow process of hard work, of connections, of building, of trying, of getting rejected, of keep going and, you know, eventually succeeding. And I mean, even today I get tons of rejections all the time, but I don't take it personally and I don't take it as a attack on who I am or what I'm doing.
Right. Yeah.
Was it harder to balance travel and going, you know, to teach yoga and to work than you thought it would be when you first kind of got introduced to the idea?
Oh yeah. I think because again, when you see it online, this idea of like, oh my God, now she's in Iceland and she's teaching yoga, life must be amazing. And now she's in Spain and now she's in Portugal. Like what I didn't realize is that it's extremely hard to maintain relationships when you're always on the road. It's really exhausting. You know, if I was teaching in Montreal, for example, teaching full time, I was teaching, let's say 10 or 15 classes a week, which equates to about 15 or 20 hours of yoga teaching in a week. When I'm doing a workshop weekend, I'm cramming over a week's worth of work into one weekend. So, you know, I did a workshop weekend in Bermuda where I taught, I think, 5 or 6 3-hour workshops in one weekend. It's 18 hours of teaching yoga in 2 days, right? Which is much more than you'd ever work yeah, it's much more than you'd ever do, over a week spent. And so what I didn't realize is how energetically draining it was, how tiring it would be, how difficult it would be to maintain relationships.
Yeah. And then I guess when you're doing that too, you kind of imagine like, oh, I'm going to Bermuda, I'm going to have this wonderful vacation as well. But like if you spend that much time working, then you kind of just want to sleep and not take advantage of it.
Exactly. I mean, I love my work and I love what I do. And I feel so fortunate that it gives me so much joy. But yeah, the truth is like, it's definitely not a vacation. And the other thing that I didn't realize was when you do a workshop weekend, at least in my profession, I'm working on the weekends and then I'm off during the week. Right? So I work Friday to Sunday and then I have to sustain myself Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday in between gigs. So if I'm doing a Europe tour, I'm not going to fly back when the time I was living in Canada, let's say, or Costa Rica. I'm not flying back to Canada or back to Costa Rica from like Monday to Wednesday and then flying back out to London on Thursday and then back Monday to Wednesday and flying to Portugal the next day, right? I'm not going to do that. So I'm staying in Europe for a sustained period of time, a month or two, let's say. And what I didn't realize was, sustaining myself in between workshops is expensive. And I was at the first points like not even breaking even. And sometimes I would come home from like working my butt off for 2 months and come back in the negatives, in the reds, because I didn't think about sustaining myself.
Yeah. It's also interesting too. I feel like some of the things that you don't realize when you're just seeing sort of that highlight reel is things like jet lag and sleeping in hotels and different beds, like every night or every couple of nights, like not being able to eat your normal like food and nourishment that you would get if you're just at home. Like all of that stuff is factors that play into like
totally
how you feel.
Oh, I'm like the most constipated traveler and it's so frustrating.
It's a good name for a travel blog.
Yeah, the Constipated Traveler. That is a really good name. It's so frustrating because like I'll get somewhere and like I know that it's going to take me ages before I feel like relief and not bloated,
Yeah.
Oh, and yeah, I mean, I think also when I first started traveling, like and teaching anyway, airports were like so exciting and hotel rooms were so exciting. And now I'm just like every single airport in the world looks exactly the same to me. An airport is just an airport. And like, I don't really give a fuck about hotels anymore. Like if I'm at a really special, great boutique place, it still really excites me. But I mean, like every Holiday Inn across the world is exactly the same, and every Days Inn around the world is exactly the same. And it doesn't give me any comfort to like be staying in a generic hotel room anymore, like it used to. It used to be exciting. It's not anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear how that's shifted. It's like I think it's with any new thing or new career. It's like things are all sparkly and glamorous at first, and then you're kind of like, okay, just like in another, Best Western or whatever it is.
Yeah, like there is a point where work actually becomes work. And the part where you get to be in a new city is still awesome. But like you said, like the hotel rooms and the, the traveling and the food and stuff like that's, just kind of part of work now.
Yeah, for sure. It's something that I find as well is like, yeah, my stomach is a little bit picky. So for me, it's like traveling is so amazing. I love being able to travel and being able to do that as part of my career. But it's also like, when I'm at home, I can make whatever I want to eat. And I know I can go to a grocery store and get everything that I want. Whereas going somewhere else is like, okay, I have to be functioning, but I also have to like just adapt to whatever is in the nearest store.
Totally. One thing I've noticed that's really changed about me is that I'm not used to cooking anymore. And I'm a good cook and I love to cook and I forget. And my first reaction is always to go out for a meal. Like even now in Costa Rica, it's my home base for the next few months. And like I'm going out for almost every meal. And I'm like, wait a minute, why am I going out? Like I have a house with a beautiful kitchen. I can cook. And I just forget that I can do that,
Yeah, we've gone through a similar transition coming back to Canada at the start of this month. So like we've got a really nice space here now with like a nice kitchen. But yeah, basically 8 months in Asia, we probably cooked for ourselves like 30 times, maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's something I used to work as a cook. So you kind of forget sometimes when you're like good at something and then you stop doing it. Then you like come back to it and you're like, oh wow, I actually enjoy this thing. Because doing stuff that we're good at is enjoyable, but just like cutting some stuff up or like making really good rice or something, and you're like, oh wow, this is actually really satisfying. Like this time it's been interesting for us coming home because it's been much more satisfying for us being here than it ever has in the past.
I had that same experience when I was in North America, like last month. So I I've been living in Costa Rica more or less for the past 3 years. And then, I spend quite a bit of time in Canada every year as well. But living in Costa Rica, and then I had a yoga retreat in Bali. I traveled in Eastern Indonesia for quite a while. And then on like a whim, I ended up in Colorado. And I was like, oh, it's so comforting to be here, to be in North America again. It's so easy. And I forgot how convenient things are and how simple life is, And yeah, I'm almost excited to kind of spend a little bit more time in North America and enjoy a bit of an easy life.
Yeah, that's like definitely what we found. Our first couple of days back, it's like I'm paying for gas, with my car in like a gas station that I always go to. And I'm like, what language do I say thank you again? And then I'm like, oh, right, I'm in Canada. I just say thank you. I know how to speak to these people. I was like, oh, this is so great.
Yeah, I mean, when I was in Toronto actually a couple weeks ago, and my friend came to meet me, and I called her from the grocery store, and I was like, what do you want? And she's like, what? I'm like, I'm in the grocery store, and they literally have everything. And I don't know what to buy. I'm completely overwhelmed. And she just like started laughing. I'm like, no, seriously, like there's 17 kinds of lettuce here. I've been standing in the lettuce aisle for 30 minutes. and it was so overwhelming, but I was like, oh yeah, like grocery stores in North America, like, where you can actually get like anything you want to make, you can make anything you want. I like that kind of stuff I'm excited about.
It's so organized.
So organized. Like the fruit is always in the same place and it goes like in order of type of fruit,
Yeah, and it's all going to be like you have consistency about what's going to be there instead of like walking in and you're like, I have no idea what's going to be in here today.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and this conversation is for another time because, I have mixed feelings about globalization and whatnot. But the cool thing about globalization is like you walk into the grocery store and you have anything you want. Like literally you can get like berries any time of year, bananas, apples, like papayas, pineapple, like any time of year you can get any food from anywhere in the world in a North American grocery store.
Yeah. So, what was the evolution of deciding to move down to Costa Rica?
So I was really burnt out in Montreal. I was really unhappy. I was like busting my butt to teach yoga. And then I was also traveling, but I was like teaching a lot of yoga full time around the city and traveling every chance I get. And then my travel schedule started to pick up more. And I just realized how unhappy I was living in Montreal. So I decided I had a yoga retreat planned for Costa Rica, and this was back in, I think, 2015. And I decided I was going to just stay for a month and live off my profits and just try to get like an objective view of my life and see what to do. And the next idea was going to be to move to Toronto after that. And came to Costa Rica. It was right around the holidays, around Christmas. And so obviously, the town is packed, and my particular town has a big problem with housing. There's quite a large housing shortage. So I get here and I'm like trying to find a place to stay after my retreat, and everything is booked. Like every single hostel, I couldn't even find a dorm bed. Like everything is booked. And I'm asking around. And then finally someone says to me, oh, there's this woman over there in a yellow house. Go into the house, ask for Melissa. She might have a place. I'm like, oh, okay. So I like walk up the road. I walk into this house. I'm like standing in the middle of this person's living room, and I'm like, hello, hi, hello. And this woman comes out and she's like, hi, what do you want? And I was like, oh, do you have a place to stay, a room for rent? And she's like, no. And then I start walking away, and she's like, well, maybe. I'm like, well, do you or do you not? And she's like, I don't know. I'm like, okay, thanks. And she's like, okay, I'll show you. I was like, this is so yeah. So she takes me around the back of her house, and she's got these 4 cute little apartments, and we walk into one of them, and it's like a disaster. It like smells bad. There's dishes in the sink. There's like flies. And we walk in, and she just bursts into tears and like falls to her knees. And I was like,
oh my gosh,
what do you do? And I didn't know what to do. I've never met this person. I'm in like a foreign country. I don't know anyone. And my first reaction was just to hold her because she was so distraught. And so I just crouched over her and I hugged her. And she cried and cried and cried, and I kept hugging her and kind of rubbing her back. And after about 10 minutes, she finally stood up and she's like, I'm sorry. I was like, it's okay. I honestly have no idea what's going on. And she goes, I'm so sorry. My father just passed away, and I was taking care of him, and this was his apartment. I haven't been in his apartment since he passed away.
Oh, wow.
And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for your loss. And I'm sorry for bringing you into this room. And like, I felt terrible. And so I just gave her another hug. And then she cried more and I cried a little bit. And we stopped this embrace. And she goes, I think I want you to live here. And I was like, okay. And she goes, well, I need time. And I was like, don't worry. I have this yoga retreat. I'll come back in a week. And she's like, okay, perfect. I came back a week later. And she had completely repainted the place, fresh sheets. It was spotless. There was flowers on the bed. Like, it was really lovely. And I think she needed to pour her energy into something. You know, she'd been pouring her energy into taking care of her father. He passed away suddenly, and then mourning. And she just needed something to take her mind off it all. And I came in, I guess, at the right time. And she said she really liked my energy. That's what she always told me. I really love your energy. And so I moved into her apartment behind her house. And her and her husband, like, were so sweet and just like treated me like their own, like the kid. They always like checked on me every day and saw how I was doing. And I think she really enjoyed fussing over me. I think she needed it. And so I said I would stay there for a month, and I started surfing. I lived very close to the ocean, you know, about a 1 minute walk away. And one day I was walking to go surfing, and her house and the apartments happened to be next to a hotel that had a really nice yoga studio. I had drawn a gigantic Om in bright pink wax on my surfboard because I wanted to look cool. Little did I know, you know, it's not really the coolest thing to do in the surf world. But anyway, wanted to look cool. So I started walking to the surf, and I see this woman on the phone, like kind of in a panic. And I look at her and I'm like, are you okay? And she's like, oh yeah, I'm fine. And I keep walking, and I see her double take and look at my surfboard. And she goes, wait a minute. Are you a yoga teacher? And I was like, yeah. And she goes, I need you. Can you teach a class tonight? I was like, okay. Turns out one of their yoga teachers left Costa Rica and decided not to come back. And it was the high season, so their classes are packed. And they didn't have anyone that night. And I was like, sure, yeah, I'll do it. I taught the class, and I got really good feedback. And just like that studio gave me 5 classes a week on their schedule. And then there was another studio that heard about my class and offered me another 6 classes a week. And before I knew it, I had more than a full-time schedule, more work than I can handle. And interestingly enough, it was a commission-based pay structure, and I was making more money in Costa Rica teaching yoga than I ever had in Canada.
Wow. I was actually just going to ask you about that.
Yeah. So I was like, why would I leave? And so that's how I stayed. And I still wasn't fully committed. I stayed 4 months, and then I went back to Canada for a few months and, you know, tried to, you know, get back to life there. And I was just like, why am I here? Like, I'm so much happier elsewhere. And so that was that.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I mean, too, it's like you're making more money, and the cost of living in Costa Rica must be way less than trying to live in Montreal or Toronto.
Actually not. It's more.
Really?
Not everywhere in Costa Rica, but the town I live in Santa Teresa, my cost of living is higher than Montreal because everyone functions on the US dollar.
Oh.
And rent here is a fortune, like a fortune. Like, you know, yeah, it's not any cheaper by any means. And food is the same price in the grocery store. But the difference in the lifestyle is that my lifestyle is free. So whereas in Canada, if I want to enjoy time with my friends, I would, you know, go to a museum or go to a bar or go out for dinner, do some kind of activity where you have to pay someone. Here, we go surfing or we watch the sunset or we go for a walk. So lifestyle is free here.
Okay. Yeah. And weather's better, of course.
And weather is better. And I don't have a car, right? So that takes away a lot of the expenses as well. I have an ATV, but it's, you know, cheaper than a car significantly.
Yeah.
So like
so funny that you can drive an ATV around in Costa Rica. That's so great.
You know, I was going to get like a beater truck. I was going to get a car, but the roads in my town aren't paved, and it was just so inconvenient. Like a car can get you out of town, but it's really inconvenient driving around in town, and a quad is what you need to get in and out of your house.
Yeah. And so do you just go in for, do Canadians have like 90 days in Costa Rica?
I'm sorry?
Do Canadians have 90 days in Costa Rica?
Yeah.
So do you just go in like 3 months and then visa run and then go back again?
Well, I mean, with my work schedule, usually I'm working abroad anyway within 3 months. And so it's never an issue.
Mm-hmm.
And then
that works out really nicely.
Yeah. And I do check into Canada, you know, quite often. My business is a Canadian business. It runs out of Canada, you know, taxes and all that stuff. And so I still have absolutely like one foot in Canada.
Yeah. Do you feel like at some point you'll change that? Like, would you like to have your business elsewhere outside of Canada, or do you feel like Canada is still kind of like home?
I'm really not sure, to be honest. It depends on what opportunities come up and what's possible. I don't really feel like Canada is home, to be honest. I don't know, actually. Like, when I think about home, I think about a place that I love, feel comfortable, and want to have roots. Mm-hmm. Definitely Costa Rica is one of my homes, and I still call Canada home, but I also call Costa Rica home. So I feel like I have two places that I consider home where I have like roots. But maybe it's because I grew up as an English speaker in the province of Quebec, and so I never really felt like I belonged or I was allowed or I fit in my home province. Like, I don't have that feeling that like Canada is welcoming and homey to me. Maybe if I moved to a different province officially, that would help.
Yeah, that's interesting. Neither of us have been to Quebec, so I don't really know exactly what that experience is like, but I can imagine that it would be very strange to be interacting with people who hold the same passport as you but don't speak your language.
Yeah, like I feel like a bit of an outsider in my own hometown, and I didn't growing up. I always felt like Montreal wasn't exactly the right place for me, but when I grew up, the city was like 50% English, 50% French. Now, a significant portion of the Anglophones have left. And so I am fluent in French, but it's still a very different culture from the English culture I grew up with. And so it is weird to feel like an outsider in your own hometown. And I mean, I'll admit that part of it is because I didn't try hard enough to immerse myself in the Quebec culture. But the reason for that is my professional life took me internationally and took me into the world of the industry of yoga, where the standard is American in the West. And so I had much more of a foot in the door in the North American yoga industry, which is English and which is governed by, the United States, essentially. I guess the United States, that's the standard. So I never tried very hard to become more of a Quebecer. I was always an English Montrealer in Quebec.
Right.
Do you know why so many people, so many of the Anglophones have left Quebec?
Yeah, because they can. The Anglophones are forced to live and work in French and do business in French, and that's fine. But if you want to do business on an international scale, the international language of business is English. So you can fight for your right to speak English. You can do everything twice. So if you want to do business in English, you can, but you have to do everything in French first, which means doing everything twice, which takes twice as long, and get translators and everything. And the tax rate provincially is the highest in Canada. So you can, go through all of that or switch provinces because, it's just less of a hassle. And the English community has the option to leave. Unfortunately, many of the French Canadians don't because they don't speak English. Right, that is my completely biased opinion. But yes, that's how I feel.
Yeah, no, it's interesting to hear about that because, Canada's such a big country and I feel like I know kind of very little about the Quebec culture. So it is interesting to hear that because lots of people being in the West, we meet people and they're like, oh, you're Canadian, or, oh, you must speak French as well. And I'm like, I speak 8 words of French.
Yeah, I love that I speak French, and I feel very fortunate that I grew up in a place with multiple languages, and I still love Montreal. It's a great place to visit, and I think the French and European influence are part of what make it amazing. And I don't want to see French Canadian culture die out, that's for sure. But I would like to see equal opportunities for English and French.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and most of my peers have left Montreal, so maybe that's why I don't feel like it's so much home anymore, because most people I know have left. I have a few really close friends there, but again, why would you stay when it's a fight to live every day? Or you can just move to Ontario and work in English and there's no problem.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you feel like you've created a community in Costa Rica?
I have a seasonal community in Costa Rica, and that's a bit of a challenge. Yeah, I have a seasonal community. So at some points of the year, I have amazing people in town, really great friends. And sometimes I feel very lonely and alone. But I'm trying. I've only been here, half the year for about 2.5 or 3 years, which is not a huge amount of time to establish yourself somewhere.
Yeah. So is Costa Rica kind of in your future then?
At this point, I can't say.
That's fair. Do you feel drawn to any other countries in the world?
For visiting, yeah. To live, no, not at this point. it's funny. I was just in Bali and I was like afraid before I left. I was afraid I was going to fall in love with Bali and want to move there. And I was like, oh, but what if I move there? It's so far from home, blah, blah. And, I went to Bali and it was great, but no part of me wanted to live there. I thought it was absolutely beautiful and a great place to visit. I'm sure I'll be back. But yeah, don't want to live there. I have a ton of places on my list that I want to visit, but I haven't found the place yet that calls me to stay for a long period of time in the way that Costa Rica did.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear. I was talking to actually a yoga teacher who's based out of Vancouver, and she was saying, like, I feel really fortunate that I was born in Vancouver and I feel like this is just my place. And I've never really felt like that where I grew up, like outside of Calgary and Alberta. I was kind of like, I like it. It's like, it's home, but it doesn't feel like it's like my place, I guess.
Yeah. I know what you mean.
I can relate to that for sure.
I don't know if Costa Rica really feels like my place either. Sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. There's a lot of things that I miss here and that I didn't realize until I traveled this past time. I have to say, like, the nature here is unparalleled. There's a sense of freedom that I've never felt anywhere else in the world. It is spectacularly and supremely beautiful. And if you have vision and imagination and hard work, you can make anything happen here. And that's really special.
Yeah, that's cool.
I didn't realize it until I went to Guatemala a couple months ago, how much I miss, like, interesting culture. Like, Costa Rica is quite Americanized, and there's not really, like, a food culture. There's not really an art culture. There's not really a music culture. And in Guatemala, like, we went to the markets, and I was like, oh, yeah, like, diversity, vegetables, fruits. It's all grown locally. It's all grown, like, within the country, and textiles and art and artisans. And, I miss that.
Yeah, definitely. I can relate to that. I've kind of wondered if maybe, like, some people are just meant to kind of be nomadic and we just hop around from place to place. I'm not really sure yet. I haven't quite figured that out, but
I'm not sure either. I mean, for me, I think at this point in my life, I'm really ready to, like, find a partner. And maybe if I had a partner that, like, you both have each other and you're both kind of interested in being nomadic right now, I think that would change the game for me. But part of me really wants to establish roots in one place. And I think that urge is because I'm ready to, like, welcome someone into my life to share it. But, if the man who comes into my life is someone who's able to work on the road and able to move, I'm sure we'd move around all the time.
Yeah, definitely. That's awesome to hear. Cool. So this has been really, really great. It's been so fun talking to you about travel specifically after our awesome conversation about yoga. Where can people go to find out more about you?
You can go to my website, laurenrudick.com, LaurenRudick.com. Or you can also find me on Instagram. My handle is my name, Lauren Rudick, so at Lauren Rudick on Instagram. I have a Facebook page, Lauren Rudick Yoga, or if you just Google me, I should show up.
Yeah, and do you have any upcoming retreats or anything like that are going to be happening?
Well, I do have an international yoga school called Yoga Academy International, and we run yoga teacher trainings and continuing education for yoga teachers all year round, all over the world. Right now, most of our programs are in Costa Rica, but we will be expanding to Panama, Guatemala, and I hope Africa within the next few months. So you can join us there or check out the website for retreats. And as well, my own website will list any upcoming retreats or workshops I'm doing abroad.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time today, Lauren. It's been so great chatting with you.
Thanks, Lauren.
Thank you. It was really fun to talk travel. I haven't done that in a long time.
To find more information, relevant links, and photos talked about in this week's episode, check out theworldwanderers.com.
If you have a question, comment, or feedback, send us an email at info@theworldwanderers.com. Join our community on Facebook at The World Wanderers or on Twitter at WorldWanderers1. As always, thanks so much for listening.
Have a great day.
Bye.